This is the Plantation House Library on Saint Helena Island, where Napoleon spent the last 6 years of his life in exile. He himself never came into this room as a kind of protest, but his generals were here, the Duke of Edinburgh, Queen Elizabeth, several other royals, and famous people throughout the years have spent time here. In this library, as we were bringing it back to life, cataloging it and repairing books, we found a very interesting and intriguing little book, Napoleon Anecdotes, written by someone who's more famous for fraudulently writing Shakespeare's handwriting and even a whole play, which eventually got him caught. He tried for the rest of his life to redeem himself by writing proper histories, anecdote books, and other curiosities, and this was one of them. We need first to get rid of the mold and the mildew and stop that process from going through the book. So we'll freeze it overnight. When it comes out, all of the little life forms that have been feeding on it should be done away with. Let's unwrap it and have a look. The paper's quite brittle, the leather very brittle, and as you can see, the binding has come apart to where it's not much more than a few sheaves of loose paper. So let's get started. We need to get rid of the smell that's left over from the mildew. And in preparation for that, I'll stick a tiny piece of paper in between each page through the whole of the book. It takes a little time, but it's worth it. With that done, we can put it inside a container with some baking soda. Baking soda is known for being able to absorb odors. People use it in their refrigerators, and we can also use it to get the smell out of books. I'll use a couple of small bone folders just to crush the lumps away, and then to serve as a kind of base to keep the book from being on top of the actual baking soda. Now, with our pages nicely fanned out using the little strips of paper, we'll place it in the container with the covers. And we'll leave it in there for a full 3 days, all sealed with the baking soda. Three days is a long time to wait when you're looking forward to getting started on a book. But with the wait over, let's open it up and see how it did. Almost no smell at all. A little bit of the pleasant book smell left and very little of the unpleasant. We'll get rid of the library tape and have a look at what we're working with. I like these end papers, but they're very deteriorated. And I love this little patch in the front cover. There might be something we can do with that. We'll remove the little papers And our first job is to take this book apart. What do we have here? Little bookmark, so decayed it just comes apart at a tiny pull. Yeah, the end papers will need some rescuing. You can open up the stitching on the bottom of the book. At the top, we have some of the leather and adhesive still there, even though it's very brittle and decayed. All we need to loosen that up is probably just a little damp cloth. We don't want to get it too wet because the paper is very delicate at this stage. And we also don't want to cut too far with that razor. We don't want to cut off the folds at the end of the signatures. Very carefully does it. And with a little patience and an hour or two of work, we start to see it coming apart. And looking less like a book and more like a pile of signatures. A signature, by the way, is just a little bundle of paper folded together. These trimmer scissors are very good for getting into those tiny spots and not cutting the paper, but getting rid of the thread. There is some leather left on the folds of these papers, but if I remove it here, I'm concerned that I'll remove the fold as well. So I'll wait until they're flat, try and get them then. This one isn't sewn together, it's glued. But with old glue, it comes apart with almost no trouble at all. And we're ready for the next stage. Some of the pages, the folds did not survive the years, but that's all right. We can repair that. The key is to make sure it's all here. If we go to the middle of the signatures, we can remove the bits of thread that are left. Looking for various bits of damage while we do. Those are proving a bit stubborn. And that's the reason why. A little too much glue and leather still on the back. We'll loosen that up a bit. Through it comes. I lay the signatures at a 90-degree angle each time we go to a new one so that I know which groups of papers go together, which ones don't. You can figure it out if they get mixed up, but it's a bit of a pain. It's nicer to just keep everything organized right from the beginning. If you're not detail-oriented, this might not be the hobby for you. If you are, you'll love it. Here's the back of the book. Again, the end papers were glued on, and with a gentle pull, that comes free. Great, there we are. That's the body of our book. Before I go on to clean the remainder of the little bits of glue off the spine, I want to get these pressed down. Not too hard because I don't want to damage the paper with the bits of glue that are left. But I do want to get the papers lying comfortably flat. Even an hour or two in there would work. I think these sat overnight. Now you can use a micro spatula. That's usually what's used to scrape bits of glue off there. But a micro spatula can be too sharp sometimes as well, and something a bit more blunt like the back of a butter knife can work really well, and that's what I'm using here. You don't want one with a really sharp corner on it or one that's too thin. This one's quite chunky and has a rounded corner on it, and it's doing the trick very well. And again, you'll notice each signature is at 90 degrees to the one below it, so that they're kept neatly apart. Now this I want to keep, but it's just too brittle and broken, so we're going to make a new one. A quick scan or a photograph will work, and a little bit of handy photoshopping. I move the papers more or less in their original position to one another, get rid of some background, and then I pull the image together, drag over some patches, and then I can smooth out the transitions to join the patches. It's a bit more finicky and painstaking than it looks right here, but it does the trick. I took the top border and pasted it onto the bottom to clean that up. So there's your before and after. We can print that out on some nice thick paper and have a good end paper for the book. For repairs, we're going to be using this paper. It's not as fine as I would like, but we're going to need the strength for those corners on the pages. The very thin kind go almost transparent when they're added with a bit of paste, which is nice when the book paper is discolored. If it's white paper, this will almost disappear onto it. With the brownish paper of this book, we'll be able to see it, but it will be tucked away in the crease. And though it's not ideal visually, structurally, it's necessary, and it will keep this book going for another 200 years. There they are ready. I take an intact sheet, and I'm just going to give extra support to the outside of the signature. Little paste. If it's an old book you're working on, you want to avoid acidic papers and acidic glue. You can get some pH neutral glue, or you can make your own paste with flour starch. There are recipes online. Now you'll notice as I tap this down, it does become a little bit translucent. Takes on a bit of the discoloration of the paper behind it, but it's still quite visible. And this is normal for this kind of repair. I'd rather have the strength than the invisibility. In order to keep pages from sticking together, I'm using wax paper. The glue and the paste doesn't stick to the wax paper much, so it's a great barrier to use between. I think tin foil might also work. But most people have pretty quick and easy access to things like this, and it works really well. There we go. We'll set him aside for a moment. And we'll go on to one that's a little bit trickier. Not only has the fold on this one disintegrated, but quite a bit of that inside page is also missing. So much so that at first I'm not sure quite where to place that. Easily solved though. I'm going to take the page that is intact and just measure across. And I see that, okay, I can move that left page over to the line and use that as my guide. And there's quite a gap in the middle that we need to fill. You may, in situations like this, need to use a wider strip. But in this case, this will be wide enough, especially when we add the second layer on the back and kind of sandwich these two between the repair paper. If you're looking for repair paper, by the way, Kozo is what you'll want to look for. Kozo, or ZO for our American friends. There we go. We'll put another one on this side, and even that little bit of paste overhang on that paper, because it's on both sides, it will be quite a strong repair actually. You notice here I'm just working at my kitchen table here. I don't have a workshop here on the island. I can use the one at the castle, or I can use the one at the Plantation House. They don't really have a workshop there, but I can work in the library. The castle has a full archives workshop. I kind of like to work in the quiet at home, especially if I'm recording it. There we go. That is nice and solid now. That'll be stronger now than it was when it was first put together, probably. Now, this book, being 200 years old, likely has some very good quality paper. The rag paper, naturally closer to pH neutral than the paper we tend to use today. So it lasts quite well, actually. If there are any particular skills or fixes, tear repairs, different binding things that you would like to see, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm quite happy to adapt the channel to things that the viewers want to see, or a particular kind of book that you would like to see restored if I have access to it. Then we can definitely put it on the list. I have some nice ones. I have some 200- and 300-year-old books lined up that we are going to give new life to. I should mention too, what we're doing here is not always to restore the books to their original styles. These books, because they are so damaged, might only be worth 50 or 100 pounds if they were to be sold, and they're definitely not readable. So to restore them to the point where they're readable in their original state, if it's even possible, would be hundreds of pounds, and they're just not rare enough for that to be worth it. However, if we can bring them back to life and readability, then they might have another 200 years of people reading them, and that's value in itself. We aren't going to remove them from the mansion library. They'll stay there. As long as the mansion's there, they'll be there. So we might as well make them beautiful again, solid again, and hopefully read again. We'll be trimming the edges of this book, but I still want to make sure that any little dog ears and folds like that are folded back out. I'm looking for any weak spots, any tears. In a book with more insect damage, I might be looking for little insect bits and old dried cocoons and things like that. This book is in quite good shape as far as that goes. It's fairly clean, even if it's broken down. And as before, I'm keeping my signatures very neatly differentiated from each other by the way that I stack them. Now here we have a tear that might be far enough in to cause problems later on. Now I do reuse that wax paper, by the way. It looked a bit rough the way I pulled that off of there, but it will get used again. Now here I'm just going to pull some of the repair paper, kind of thin it out, but it's got such long fibers in it that it'll stay together and we get these thin little bits. And then I pick it up with the brush, and as I place it and get the moisture, the glue in there, I'll put a little more here than I would on the spine. You can see it almost disappears. A nice light Kozo paper will do the same job, and it will almost be invisible by the end of it. I put quite a bit on this one, both sides. And it looks a bit rough, but we'll trim that down and you'll be hard pressed to know where it is, even if you know you're looking for it. You see a few books there in the shelf, a 300-year-old New Testament, East India Company book that's a couple hundred years old, and a nice geographic atlas with fold-out maps and things. There's some very exciting books that we will hopefully see soon. Okay, that is the spines repaired. Now this cover is not robust enough to be used again, but the edges are more brittle than the center, and I think we can save this little patch in the middle and use it as decoration on the cover that we make out of new leather. A good sharp knife is always very important when you're dealing with leather, although this is so soft and old that it's really easy to cut, which is great if you're cutting where you're wanting to be cutting. If you slip, then it's not so great. But in this case, a little care, sharp knife, and no troubles. Looking up William Henry Ireland is worth it. You get a nice little read of the character who wrote this book. It makes it more interesting to me. His checkered past makes it more intriguing than it would otherwise be. Even though I'm here on Saint Helena Island, where Napoleon spent his last 6 years, and I'm redoing a book written about him and held in the library here for so long. I'll never throw back anything that makes it even more interesting. Now here I'm lining up some tape in the middle of the grid because I'll be folding these, and I want a nice clear line that shows me where to fold it. The decay on the edge of the pages is not even, so where the fold lined up before might not be exactly where I want it to be in the future. And because the edges of the papers tend to get more brittle more quickly than the interior, I want to be very kind of uniform and careful when I fold this. So I'm using these two rulers, go up to about 90 degrees, and then I can fold it down how I want it. Use a bone folder to make that crease nice and sharp. And one page more or less restored. We've got a little trimming to do on the repair paper there, but that's what we're looking to do. Handling this book now that the folds have been reinforced and with the new folds put in place, it's starting to feel much different than it did before. Even though it's disassembled, I don't feel like I'm dealing with something really delicate. It's got some structural integrity back to it, some strength. Now we take these tabs off. They aren't hurting anything, but because we'll be punching holes in it soon, I want to make sure that we can line the top of the book up properly to get the holes in the right place. And you'll see in a few moments what I mean if you don't know. So, 2 per fold, and a lot of folds. Better get to it. Here's that paper that we worked on before and repaired. I gently take off the bit that's hanging over. Now that I have them cut, put the folds nested in amongst each other into their signatures, and our new text block is starting to take form. With the folds in the repair paper, it's much thicker on one side than the other, and for pressing it, we want it to be level. So I'll rotate every second signature so that half of the repairs are on the right and half are on the left, like so. And then when we lay it down, and we grab this hefty piece of marble, set it on top, press everything down and make those folds nice and sharp and permanent. Maybe you can see already the book's thinner, it's sharper, it's not springing back. The spine end will be a little thicker than it was before, but that won't hurt anything. We'll construct it in such a way that it accounts for that. So back into their proper configuration. Let's just double check that our pages are all in the correct order. We aren't missing anything. We didn't accidentally put one in upside down. We're checking that the signatures are sequential. And they are. It's a small book, so that's a pretty quick job. Great big book, that can take some time. The top of the book is called the head, and the bottom is called the tail. So here I'm marking the head of Napoleon Anecdotes, and I'll use this little piece of cardboard as a guide for where I'm going to punch holes in the signatures, ready for sewing. This makes sure they're all lined up very well. Mark the bottom of the book. And then I want to go in about 2 centimeters from the edge, about an inch, a little more than an inch, And that's to leave room for me to fold the leather over when I put the cover over. At the end, we don't want any stitching getting in the way of that leather coming through. So I mark the outermost holes there. I like to mark the center just because I like things all symmetrical inside. And then I need to mark where the ribbons are going to be, the tapes, they're called in bookbinding. And they're basically the strength of the book that holds everything together. The signatures are sewn onto the tapes, and the tapes are glued into the cover. And as long as those tapes are holding strong, your book is likely going to hold strong. 2 would do for this book because it's little, but I'll put a third one in. Doesn't hurt anything, adds a little bit of extra strength, and also there's less of a gap for the thread to go through in the middle. It's going back and forth through the paper a little more often, which just keeps it all tighter and closer together. Now I'll want to be pushing the awl, which is a sharp hole punching instrument, straight down vertically. And in order to help me do that, I'm just going to cut a little notch out of each space where I'll be pushing an awl through. You can kind of put it through at an angle and then lean it up straight and vertical as soon as it finds its spot. But I find the few seconds that it takes to cut these little notches into the guide allow me to just come in straight from the top and get those holes nice and as precisely placed as I can get them. And there we go. So we're ready to punch some holes. This is our punching cradle that I made in one of my other videos, and you can make a very cheap, quick version of it as well. There's a video for that. And you'll see some other templates on the top left of your screen that I've put some book cloth paper over, just to keep them sturdy through a lot of use, because they're kind of standard size for journals and books that I do. Since little Napoleon here is an odd size, he gets his own paper. So there's the awl. You see it's as straight down, as vertical as possible. This cradle keeps everything aligned and gives the book some support. That awl can punch through the paper behind it. We wind up with this nice uniform set of holes through all of the papers of the signature. We do this each way to each signature, and they all line up perfectly with each other, is the idea. If I were to try to sew these together without pre-punching the holes, the paper would bend and shift, and the needle would not likely go through straight, and it would maybe hold it together, but it would be a bit of a mess. By doing it this way, everything is really nicely lined up like that. It'll be that way all the way through the book. So each signature gets its turn in the cradle. I call it a punching jig, but I think the proper name is bookbinding cradle. This is quite a satisfying part of the bookbinding process. A nice repetitious activity with some nice punching sounds. It's a bit satisfying poking through there. Bit scary when it's a 200 or 300-year-old book you're poking holes in. But let's face it, we just cut it apart with scissors and a razor knife, so we're all in. There's anticipation too, because this is really getting down to the point where we're getting ready to sew it together. And sewing it together is when it becomes basically a book again. You sew the text block together. You basically have a book. All that's left is to make the cover to protect it. And I haven't actually read this little book yet. That's one of the first things I'm going to do when I'm done. I have friends with a tree in their back garden that Napoleon used to have tea under when he was off on a walk. His imprisonment doesn't sound too bad, actually. He had a wage, he had a wine cellar, he had his own house, he had 8 or 10 servants with him that, you know, did their running around for him. He was invited to Plantation House for meals and things, but refused to come as kind of a protest against his imprisonment. The first governor, in fact, still called him Emperor Napoleon, where the second one put a stop to that, but he even still called him General Napoleon. So there was a lot of respect there, I think, even between enemies. It was people that they maybe begrudgingly said, yeah, that's a human being of skill and ambition and all those things that were very highly looked at back then and still are in many ways today. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting out the same size of paper as the book is made of in a paper that's a similar color and is heavy and sound paper. It's a solid pH neutral paper that I can put on either end of the book, and it will serve as further protection to keep that old, little bit brittle text block in a very secure position for the next 200, maybe 300 years, maybe longer, until someone else will maybe take it down and say, let's take this apart and fix it. And who knows what technology they have. They might be doing some pretty amazing things to restore it to its former glory. We rebuilt our inside end papers there from the other book to put back in this one. We need to print those out and get them in there as well. So this is our text block, protective papers on the end, on the front one, and the back one. And we are very close to ready, but you see how those folds now have been expanded out a bit by the hole punching. We don't want that, so it needs another pressing down. Thanks guys, if you're subscribing or if you're part of the Patreon family, very much appreciated. And I hope to see you in the comments and the likes, and I'll respond to everything I can. That's the end of part 1. See you soon.